Hey, welcome to episode 287 of Ugly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman, and today's episode is very appropriately entitled The Challenge of Caring, because my guest today cares. She really cares. I'm not here doing this podcast and in the rest of my career, I'm a writer, and I speak to audiences. I've spoken all around the country at different points, but I'm not here because I did it alone. I've had the support of huge family support, huge friend support, and then just people who really believed in me. And our guest today has believed and cared for countless people, including me. Back like 15 years ago, didn't know her well. I knew her as an acquaintance. But she knew I was a poet, and she took interest in my poems and said, "Wow, I really like these. I really want to celebrate these." And to a poet who's insecure about his poems, that's a huge deal. And this part of her story, just championing someone, and it's not like we got together every week or even once a month, probably once a year, but she championed me. She championed me, and this gets me thinking how powerful it is for any one of us to champion other people. And it doesn't take all day or even once a month to champion someone. It just takes being kind to them, seeing the best in them, encouraging them, and helping things move forward. And the challenge comes in that life is overwhelming, and there's so many people, and 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 it's just a lot, but there's so much power in championing, and so much power in caring, and so much power in being kind, and I I'm so excited to bring on our guest today because she embodies this. She embodies this. But before I talk for hours about the magical person she is, let me bring her on, because you're here like it's a podcast where I'm interviewing someone, so I better bring on the guest. But first, this. And, but first, this. I don't think I've ever played before, but first, this.
Today's guest, Karen Brokenleg.
Please welcome to our Ugly Awesome Podcast, Karen Brokenleg. Woo!
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for your kind words.
And thank you for your kindness over the years, my friend. In more recent years, you started to tell me about your parents and what exceptional people they were. Would you tell us a bit about who they were?
Sure. My dad was a college professor. He taught for a short time at Sioux Falls College, then Sioux Falls College in Sioux Falls, and then he obtained a job in political science and government at SDSU in Brookings. And that's where he was from the year I was born until he died in 1965. So they always felt that education was important, that kind of thing. My mother had gone to a 2-year program for music, and when I was in 3rd grade, she became a music teacher in the Brookings School District for elementary grades. So I had my own mom for my music teacher for several years. That was fun. It was fun. But they were people that taught me so many things. They told me to be accountable for my actions. You know, if you made mistakes, you'd learn from them and then you go on. You know, that you try to be honest with people. They taught me to care for other people. We used to spend Friday nights downtown in Brookings. We didn't have a lot of money watching people. We'd park the car and watch people on a Friday night, and I always had such fun. To this day, I still enjoy sitting in a mall or a store and watching people and imagining what's going on in their lives. So they just made me they gave me the basis for loving life and loving people, and I will be forever grateful for that.
If I had known you when you were like 7, 8, or 9 and asked you, "Hey, Ken, what do you think you want to do when you grow up?" What would you have said?
I think my first wish was that I could have a ranch and have horses. That
Oh,
didn't
wow.
that didn't turn out to be something that happened, but I would have loved to have had a ranch. Had my dad lived, I maybe would have. I'll never know that, but I just really enjoyed animals and being around them and had horses as I grew up and went riding all over the place out in the Black Hills where we were in the summertime. And yeah, that would have been my first love. And then after that, I think as I got a little bit older, I loved for some reason, I always loved the medical field. It fascinated me, and I thought that I would be a nurse.
Hmm.
And actually everything that I went through in high school for preparation for college was based toward nursing. But that I got into college in nursing and thought, "Don't think this is for me." And then I got married and had kids, so that got put on hold for some years.
What about nursing made you step back and be like, no.
In nursing?
Yeah, what about the nursing profession once you got into it made you step back and go, "Oh,
You
no."
know, I don't think it was the nursing profession per se, it was me in the sense that I was not good at sciences, and I had not realized how poor I was at sciences until I
Mm.
got challenged with some of those in college, and it just wasn't something that interested me. And then I have to laugh that they said they were going to practice giving shots, and I said, "An orange?" And they said, "No, on each other." And I said, "No, we're not going to do that on me, thank you very much."
So you refused to do that?
So I what?
You refused to do that?
Well, unfortunately, I got married at the end of my 2nd year, and so some of those choices were taken out of my hands.
Nice. You mentioned that your father passed away.
Yeah.
What were the circumstances of that?
Well, we had in 1965, for some reason, my father always had a relatively new car. They didn't have a lot of money. I know today that he must have had a perpetual, car payment. But we drove a lot out to the Black Hills. We lived in Brookings, South Dakota in the winters. My father had a 9-month contract at SDSU, and my mother taught in the school. So in the summers, they both had the summers off. And they owned housekeeping cabins out in the Black Hills called Echo Valley. My mother had named that. It had been an old sawmill, and they had taken it over and built cabins, adding one or two, each year or two, and rented them out to tourists.
Was this near Mount Rushmore?
It was actually, as the crow flies, it was a mile behind Mount Rushmore. It was
Oh,
about
what
2
a
miles
great
from
location.
yeah,
Holy
2 miles
man.
from Keystone, South Dakota,
How
on the old
many?
Hill City Keystone Road.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was right in the midst of the hills, and it was a beautiful valley. We could climb a mountain called Old Baldy, and once we'd get to the top, you'd be looking right at the back of Mount Rushmore. So that was what was fun to do too, but so the summers, my father called the summers his recreation. and he
His
loved the
his recreation.
recreation, not recreation, recreation. And
Wow.
he would
Wow.
put on his old khaki pants and his, his sweat-stained hat, which my mother tried to throw away many times, and he
Mhm.
always retrieved. And he did all the manual labor around the place. He did all the fixing of things that needed to be done. His dad had been a carpenter, and my father had learned some of those skills.
Mm,
In fact, the house that we lived in at Echo Valley, he and his father had built for us, and it's still
mm,
there. It's been remodeled
mm,
some by the new owners, but it's still there. So we spent summers in the Black Hills, and that's where I had my horses. We had pasture land, and I would get up in the morning and get on my horse and go. But back to my dad and his motor vehicle accident. In 1965, we had purchased a new Ford station wagon, and my father, it was an automatic. We had never had an automatic vehicle in our lives. We always had a stick shift. That's what I had grown up on. And so it was our first car with an automatic transmission. And my father was driving out to the Black Hills over Hobo Day weekend to finish draining the pipes and closing up the place at Echo Valley for the winter.
What weekend?
Hobo Day.
What's Hobo Day?
It's homecoming for SDSU.
Oh, okay,
It's quite a big deal.
just for everyone who
Yeah.
cool,
Who
awesome.
doesn't might know that. And I had planned on going with my father, but I was taking a chemistry class in my senior year at high school. And I said to him the day we were going to go, I said, Dad, I need to stay home. If I miss Monday, because he had Monday off, if I miss the class on Monday, I'm going to get behind because I'm struggling to keep up with chemistry. And so we decided I would stay home and he would go. So that evening, I got home just after he had left, and my mother told me that my dad had said that he loved me. And we went about our normal evening. I went to a high school football game and that kind of thing. And when I got home, my mom and I talked for a little bit and we turned in to bed. That evening at about 11 p.m., I I had a phone in my bedroom, and I remember waking up knowing that my phone had been ringing, though it had stopped, and so I picked up my phone just in time to hear the man on the other end of the line say, "Laurel," that was my dad's first name. Laurel was killed instantly, and so that was how I found out my father had died. He had evidently been driving 13 miles east of Rapid City on the interstate, and there was a watering hole off to the right side, and some deer had come up onto the interstate, is what they decided when they reconstructed the accident. My father always wore his seat belts. That was a firm rule in our family, even back then when you just had the waist belt. And he missed the deer. You could see from the skid marks an empty station wagon. It had sort of fishtailed, and he had gone down into the median between the two highway interstate lanes. My father taught me to drive, and he said, "If you ever go off the highway, you come back up onto it very slowly because your wheels can catch on the pavement or the gravel, and it can cause your car to flip." So I had always known that. But a couple of things happened. It had been raining, and so the median had was wet and soggy, and I think he thought he'd get stuck if he stayed too long on that. And then right ahead of him was a highway patrol crossover where they can turn around on the interstate and go back. And we think he saw that in his headlights and realized if he didn't get back on the highway, he would hit that. And so he went back up onto the highway faster than he would normally have done. And when he did that, the left front tire of the vehicle caught in a they said it was a freak accident, a little crack on the pavement on the interstate, and it did flip the car. Now, my father had his seatbelt on, however, it broke. It was still latched when they found the car, but it had severed where it went between the seats. And so when the car flipped and my father's full weight was put on the seatbelt, it severed and the front door of the car on the driver's side popped open, and my father was ejected from the vehicle and landed in the median. And then he hit the median hard enough, excuse me, that he got a basal skull fracture. That's the big bone in the back of the head. And he got a basal skull fracture, which would have meant what I know today, working with people with brain injuries, is that his brain herniated. It started to swell up. And the only place for that swelling to go in the brain is into the brainstem. And that brainstem controls our breathing and our heart rate and our heartbeat. And so he would have died instantly because his brain would have swollen up and shut off his breathing. And then the car rolled over him and crushed his chest, but he would not have known that. So fortunately, there was someone coming the other way and came upon the accident quite quickly and called for the highway patrol. So I won't go into the details of that, but we did try and rectify the fact that the seatbelt broke and the car was only 2 weeks out of the, brand new car.
Oh,
But,
what
yeah,
a
so,
thing of
that
mishap.
it was not a fun time, but, I think it was harder for my mom than me. I mean, it certainly was difficult for me, but to lose your life partner, my parents at that point had been married for 32 years, and they had been married 16 years before they adopted me. So they'd had a long time together, and to lose that life partner was very difficult for them. Though in the end, she came through it and went on and had I think what I could call a pretty good life.
So 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 for you, how old were you when this happened?
When my father died, I was 17. Yeah.
As a 17-year-old, how do you start to process that? You picked up the phone in the late at night
Yeah.
and
Yeah. They, that we didn't go to counseling in those days. I don't remember anyone ever suggesting counseling. I don't think it was an in thing. There was a stigma very much attached, I think, to going to see a counselor in those days, at least to my understanding. Our church pastor didn't counsel me. He may have counseled my mother, but I don't recall ever having conversations really with anyone about that event. So I had times that I would just have days where I would just burst into tears and I would just let them come. I would feel the loss and then I'd feel better for a while. And over the years, that pain got became more time in between each time like that over the years. Even to I used to go to the cemetery. He was buried in Rapid City, and I would go to the cemetery and sit on the ground and have conversations with my father like I had when he was alive, and that helped me, even though I didn't get an answer per se. It helped me just to share my feelings and my thoughts with him when he was there. I wrote him a letter once, that helped me process things. So, I talked to people about it. Wasn't I've never been one to shy away from talking about death or dying, and so I talked to people about it, and my friends and other family members, and I guess that's how I coped with it.
what words would uh for someone dealing with a fresh grief now, what words of consolation, words of direction, ideas would you give them?
I often tell people they will get through this, but they won't get over it. You don't get over losing somebody that's been such a part of your life ever, I don't think. It's always there, but you get through it. And at the time, if someone had said that to me, I'm not sure how I would have felt, but I knew that I also felt somewhat responsible for taking care of my mother. I was an only child, and so somebody had to step up and make sure that she was okay. So I tried to do that, and I sometimes think that a lot of my grief may have been set aside for a period of time while I tried to take care of my mom and make sure that she was gonna get through this okay. My mother was a very stoic, strong woman, and then I would hear her crying herself to sleep at night.
Mhm.
And as a teenager, what happened was that this woman who had always been there for me and had always been so strong and capable, hearing her cry herself to sleep at night, my initial response, which now I look back on and I'm ashamed of myself, was anger at her because I felt that I think I was scared. I think I was frightened. This
Mm.
person that had always been there to support me now needed my support. And I think I didn't quite at 17 understand all of that, and I didn't fully understand what her needs were at the time, having lost her life partner. So, but I think that you need to talk to somebody about how you feel. You need to say the person's name when they've died, so they're still there for you. It's nice if other people can say their name or can talk about memories they had with the individual. It's nice if people can allow you, as you're doing, to talk about those events that are pretty traumatic in your life. And through all of that, I think you work through it, but you have to accept that you won't get over it and that there will be times that that grief comes back very freshly in your mind, and other times when it sort of gets pushed to the back, but it never fully leaves you when you've loved someone. And others need to accept that.
It it's true. I mean, lots of major points in there, but one that the grief never fully leaves is just part of continuing on.
It is.
And
Yeah. You learn to live without the person, but they're never out of your thoughts. You have memories and good thoughts and things, and they're always there. They're always with you in some way.
and then the other thing I want to touch on that you said it's nice when people talk talk about talk about your dad and talk about memories and
Yeah.
sometimes I know at least for me I shy away from talking about someone who's deceased because I don't want to make the person grieving feel bad. But you're saying actually it's the other way around. Talking about the person helps.
One thing that I've learned is that everybody grieves differently. So what I'm saying is what worked for me. I'm not sure that it works for everybody. But, I had a friend whose son died in his sleep, and just referring to him by his name and talking about him even after his death, it makes us realize that that person was here, that they touched our lives.
Mm.
And I think for others that can be important.
Mm.
I remember that some of the letters that my mother and I received from people months after my father had died were some of the most important, at least to me, because as time went by, the world keeps going, and you sort of feel like people have forgotten that loved member of your family who died. And those letters that came a bit later with memories of my father made me feel good. It made me feel like there were still people out there who remembered him and felt positively about him. And that was nice. So I don't I don't ever mind being asked questions about people who have died. My oldest granddaughter, insists that she knows my mother, who she had died, oh my gosh, at least 15 or more years before my granddaughter was born. And my granddaughter says, "Oh, I talked to great grandma Engberg. I've talked to her. I know who she is." And I think she truly has in her own way. One day she
Mm.
said to me, out of the blue, she says, "Grandma, you're not nearly as patient as great grandma Engberg was. Where are you?"
Oh.
And I had to say, "No, honey, I'm not. Your great grandma Engberg was much more patient than I am."
Wow.
So that somehow she has this connection with her. And I don't know what people believe about that, but I think there are things like that that can truly happen with people and with children. They haven't learned all the rules that us adults have around surrounding death, and they can be quite open about things. So
Mm.
that can be healing too.
Yeah, very healing,
Yeah.
very healing. You mentioned another dimension of your story and passing, which is easy to kind of forget about as you've been talking, because your parents were so loving and wonderful,
Yeah.
but you were adopted, right?
I was at 5 weeks of age. Yep, I was adopted by my adoptive parents, and when I was 32 years old, I located my birth mother, and I had a lifelong relationship with her until her death about 4 years ago, just a month or so before she turned 92. She and my mom got along well. They met several different times. My adoptive mom was my mom. I mean, she's the one who raised me, rocked me to sleep at night when I couldn't sleep, and took me to the hospital when I fell off my bike and all those things. But my birth mother was also I was just really blessed because she made this difficult decision to make an adoption plan for me, and it was a good decision for me, and I think probably for her at the time in her life. She went on to have 4 other children, 3 daughters and a son, so my half siblings, and I met them all, so that was nice. But I always say the values of my birth family and my adoptive family were different. That wasn't that one was better or worse than the other. Our values were just different. My adoptive family valued education, so of course so did I. They had a strong faith, so I did too, still do. And my birth mother was not a churchgoer, you know, but she did some wonderful things. And I got the chance to tell her to her face how pleased and how thankful I was. She had not hidden my existence from her family. Her
Mm,
other 4 children knew of me, they knew when my birthday was. She always remembered me and her thoughts on my birthday. They knew that I was out there, so that when I was able to locate her when I was 32, I wasn't a deep, dark secret.
mm,
And so that made my entrance into their lives much easier than it might have been had I been a deep, dark secret. So she made that much easier for me by her openness and her honesty in sharing her story with her family, and I'll always be grateful for that. But I always say, and I think I've said it to you, Jason, God knew the kind of parents I needed, and He gave them to me. My
mm.
adoptive parents were wonderful people. Not without faults, we all have them, but just what I needed in my life, and I was not probably the easiest child. I don't mean that I got into trouble. I was sort of a goody two-shoes, boring, but
Mm,
but they allowed me to do things like make mistakes and to learn from those, and
mm.
were always there supporting me. Just always had something uplifting to say when I had struggles, and so I will always be grateful for that as well.
Beautiful. For anyone listening who is considering adopting, what would you say to them?
Well, you know, I've been reading a book about adoption and I hadn't thought of it this way. My experience, as I said, was very positive. I never felt like I didn't belong. My extended adoptive family always accepted me. I never felt different, from the rest of them. I do know that I worked at Lutheran Social Services in what they called post-legal adoption for a while. And what that meant was that when adoptees or birth parents would call in, I would write up a non-identifying summary of the information in their files. So if it was a birth parent, I could share some information about the child that they had placed for adoption, but not names or where they had been placed or anything like that. If it was an adoptee, then I could try to make contact with the birth parents for them to see if they might be open to contact. I can tell you that a lot of times when you adopt a child, boy, you must have to have a lot of love and patience because you get a personality that doesn't come from your family. We
Mm,
always say, "Oh, that came from my dad," or "That came from my
mm,
mom," or and you don't those adoptive parents don't have that. And so, my mother was a very calm individual. My father was also very calm, used humor for so many things, and they adopted this child who could be quite excitable, and everything in life could be a crisis, whether it was good or bad. Like, "Ah!" And so,
like,
uh
ah!
yeah, so they, they had to put up with that, and they had to figure that out, and I think that that sometimes can be a challenge in adopting kids is that I had people call me at Lutheran Social Services who adoptive parents who called me and said, "We don't understand. Our child's 17, and it seems he's becoming an alcoholic, and none of our family have ever drunk alcohol. What's going on?" And usually, when I looked back in the file, I could see that perhaps one of the birth parents had problems with alcohol, and so some of those things are hereditary, and you can't do away with them. I have things that are hereditary that I do that my family did. Funny gestures, things like that, that we are do the same, my birth family. But there's nurturing in there too, and in my case, I think the nurturing in my view, my nurturing took over, from the what you have hereditarily. I think my nurturing had more influence on my life than the other. There are people who would disagree with that, I'm sure. But the book that I'm reading talks about the fact that my birth mother cared for me for the first 3 weeks of my life, and that's what they did in those days before you finally signed the papers terminating your parental rights, and this book talks about how, you've been carried 9 months in the womb of this woman. You've heard her voice, you've heard the sounds around her for 9 months as a child in the womb, and then she cared for me for 3 weeks, so you get used to the interactions between you, the smells, of your birth mother and things like that, and then all of a sudden, literally one day to the next, you are uprooted from that and placed into an adoptive family. They say that some adoptees carry that trauma with them. I I don't know. I am not a researcher. I didn't, that I can recall, really carry any trauma about being adopted, but I think that probably there are some people who do. But there are those things that's how you bond to your mother that are, then you're all of a sudden taken from her and placed with another mother who may interact with you entirely differently, may smell
Mm,
differently, sound differently. I don't know how that actually affects children. This
mm,
book is interesting.
mm,
But for me, it was, as I said, a very positive experience, and, I only remember once walking downtown with my parents when I was probably about 5 with one parent on holding either hand walking down the street in
mm,
Brookings, and in one moment feeling just so safe and secure and warm, and then literally in the next few seconds, in that same situation, them still holding my hands, we're still walking down the street together, feeling completely alone.
mm,
And I wonder sometimes if maybe that feeling came from that disruption of who my mother was in that early time frame, but who knows? You can focus on that or you can go on with life, and I guess I chose to go on living with what I had and make the best of it.
yeah, it's such a good point. We can focus on on tough stuff, from the past. We do have that choice, and it's not always easy. We can focus on tough stuff from the past, or we can go on and make the best of it.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
Excuse me.
then you became a mom of how many kids?
3 children. And my children just happened to come 5 years apart. The only reason I mention that is I had 15 years of adolescence to live through.
Oh my god. Do you get, like, a trophy for that, or
You'd think, wouldn't you? Oh, I can remember thinking, if I made it through 15 years of adolescence with my kids, I could make it through anything.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it was fun. It was quite a journey, though.
So
But
so unfortunately, like, sometimes the work of a a stay-at-home mom is taken for somewhat for granted in
it
society,
is.
and what would you say about the work of the stay I mean, what kind of like what's it like?
I know that I now say to people, "Do you work outside of the home? I know you work in it." You know?
Mm,
What would I say? Oh my goodness. You know, parenting and being a mom is probably one of the most exciting things that can happen to a person in life. I have to tell you, my ex-husband had a saying that I always appreciated. He said, "There are heights of hell and no, there are heights of heaven and depths of hell that someone who's never been a parent will never know." So heights of heaven and depths of hell that someone who's never been a parent will never know. And I've always remembered him saying that because it really fits very very appropriately to a mom or to a parent. There are such wonderful things that can happen with your kids, and there are some very difficult and sometimes very sad things that can happen with your children. I think the important thing for people raising kids is that they don't lose themselves in being a mother, especially if you're an at-home mom. I found things to do and found ways to have a little time to myself where I could sort of regroup. One of those was getting the kids to bed at night and staying up a little later so that I could read a book or just relax for a while, have a cup of tea, unwind from the chaos of the day. I was fortunate in finding a job that was once a week in the evenings, on Monday evenings for 3 hours. For 10 years, I taught childbirth classes in Sioux
mm,
Falls, and so that got me out of the being a mom pattern and being someone that helped me feel like I was capable of doing something else other than being a mom.
mm,
But you're right, people don't recognize being a parent as or being a mother, and I've known stay-at-home fathers. You don't get the accolades and things that you get when you're working, where you people see what you're doing. You make a difference. You maybe make a difference in a committee. You might make a difference in decisions and direction that a company goes. When you're a stay-at-home mom, your focus is to make sure, or a dad, you focus on doing what's best for your children and hoping you're guiding them in the right direction to be capable young adults who contribute to society. So sometimes we lose ourselves a little bit in that process. So it's important to find things that keep you grounded as an individual, as a person, other than just being a mom or a dad that's staying at home.
and it's you mentioned how people working like get a lot more recognition for making a difference, but like as a stay-at-home mom, you're like literally making a difference every day for the next generation of
Yeah.
humanity. But
You hope so. With all of our failings as mothers, we do the very best we can. We're imperfect, doing our imperfect best at being mother. So, we make
it's
mistakes.
interesting. I mean, like you mentioned this earlier with your mom. It's interesting as a kid we look up at uh, parents oftentimes and think, "Wow, they're perfect. They know all the answers. They know exactly what to do." And as a mom, did you always feel like you were doing the perfect thing?
Oh, heavens no. Heavens no. I made a lot of mistakes in my life as a and, it's funny, you think back on your first child, you grow and learn right along with them. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what in those days, we had cloth diapers. I didn't even know how to fold a cloth diaper correctly. Had to learn to do that. So you just sort of go with the flow and try and figure things out as you're going. Now they have mothers groups and things like that that didn't seem to exist when I was raising children. What we did have though were if we were stay-at-home moms, and there were more of us back then that were stay-at-home moms, we had coffee groups. We would take our kids and go to a neighbor's, or they'd bring their kids and come to our house, and we'd
Mm.
have coffee while we had the kids racing around our knees and playing with each other and being interrupted in our conversations by the children, but it sort of kept us sane. You had to have some adult conversation once in a while. I remember one day.
Would that have been every weekday or, like, once a week, or
Oh,
how often?
usually it was once a week.
Mm.
And sometimes I got a call from one of my good friends saying, "Karen, can you come over? I need some adult conversation." And so you did things like that for each other, and you could do it. It was nice. You could do that. The neighborhoods were a little different. I don't always know all my neighbors now, but in those days I did, and I knew who I could go and borrow a cup of sugar from, or who I could go have coffee with, and it was just a little bit of a different world when you were staying at home. And there were things you could do if you wanted to volunteer someplace. Once the kids got into school, you had more free time. But I was very fortunate. My youngest was 5 when I went into the work world. So that was a blessing that I got to stay home with her through her 5th year. My son had me at home with him for 15 years, and my middle daughter had me home with her for 10 years. So my youngest daughter sort of got the short stick on that, but it worked out okay.
So you I mean, your story has so many facets. So you mentioned going into the work world, which involved going back to school,
Yeah.
back to college when you were how old?
I was 33. 33.
So what is it like trying to do college classes and raise kids?
It was interesting. I did fine with it until it came time for exam. Everyone who knows me well knows I have a terrible test anxiety. And
Mm,
so when I was studying for an exam, if anybody bothered me, they got snapped at 'cause I was trying
mm.
to retain information. I remember studying when my youngest was, well, she would have been 1 when I went back to school. So when she was probably 2 and I'd be studying for a test, I'd put on little records for her to listen to, and they had these stories where it would say, when you hear a ding, turn the page, so she could turn the page in the book. And I can remember thinking I was going to write about Little Red Riding Hood in my test exam because I had heard that song over story over and over and over again while I was studying. But you get sort of good at blocking things out, but I know my children managed. I don't know how they did. I'd have to ask them. I wonder how they remember those years when I was studying and trying to go to school. The nice thing was that I spread my college over 4 years, even though I didn't need all of the credits because I usually took 2 classes a semester, and so that helped, with some of the stress. It wasn't like I was carrying a full load every year, and that was nice. So it took me 4 years to get my social work degree, but that was okay. I learned a lot along the way.
So then you worked in a variety of places in the hospital, including the
Yeah,
ICU, which
yeah.
sounds intense.
Yeah, I worked in at Sioux Valley, then Sioux Valley, now Sanford, from 1987 to 1993, and things were very different back then. I mean, as far as areas you could cover in the hospital, I covered the, urology, neurology, the 2 adult ICUs, pediatrics ICU, adolescent care, and the eating disorder unit at that time. And a little later on, I also picked up the neuroacute unit, which didn't exist when I first started working. Um,
And generally, what are social workers helping patients and families with in the hospital?
in the hospital, in the hospital, the actual individual that you're working for is the patient, but they're oftentimes too sick to be a big part of the conversation, but many times they can be a part of that conversation. And if they can be, that's what you want, is to be able to talk directly with the patient and see what their wishes are. But it was always enjoyable working with the patients and the families. I got to know so many people from so many different backgrounds with so many different struggles and positives in their lives. And so what I did as a social worker was try to listen to both the patient and the family, sort of learn their stories and find out what it was that they were wanting and needing after their time in the hospital, because my job is to help plan for that discharge after the hospital, and you wanted to make sure that you did what was right for the patient so that they ended up, whether it was at home with services or had to go to a nursing home for rehab, you wanted to make sure that they went to the place that would best serve their needs after discharge. So that's pretty much what a social worker did. There were more things. I worked on the geriatric assessment team at Sioux Valley. That was very interesting because you again went with a pharmacist, the physician, a number of different employees that worked on the geriatric assessment team, and tried to really understand where the patient and the family were coming from. And I learned a lot from that geriatric assessment team. Questions to ask, things not to say. So it was a busy time. That's where I got my love for working with people who sustained brain injuries. Was started at
So,
Sioux Valley.
will you please talk a little more about brain injuries for like a lot of people probably haven't luckily encountered someone experience having a brain injury themselves or encountered someone who's so
You'd be
so so what's tell us about brain injuries.
well, you'd be surprised at how many people have sustained a brain injury. I think the statistics are that every 15 or 20 seconds in this country, someone sustains a traumatic brain injury. And there are
Oh,
different
wow.
kinds of brain injuries. There's acquired brain injuries, which you can get from something like encephalitis, some illness that affects, meningitis that can affect the brain. Traumatic brain injury refers specifically to something that happens to you, as a blow to the head, whether it can be a motor vehicle accident, a motorcycle accident, a fall. It can be a gunshot wound. Any of those things can cause a traumatic brain injury. So, we I always say, as you know, and I've heard it from others, that if you know someone with a brain injury, you know one person with a brain injury. Um,
And what does that phrase mean?
it means that you can't lump all people who have sustained a brain injury together. They may have similar symptoms, but they can show up in very different ways for different individuals. Some people who sustained a traumatic brain injury also have physical problems. They may have weakness on one side of the body from where the brain was damaged on the opposite side. So I have a friend that walks sort of dragging his left leg, and his left arm he has to sort of hold in his hand as he walks. But he can walk. But he also has the brain injury that came from the accident that he was in. So he can when you see him, you know something has happened to him. When you see a lot of people who have sustained a brain injury, they look just as normal as I do, as you do. We would have no idea by looking at them that anything has happened to them. And that seems to be something that people with brain injury struggle with. If they look okay, then others assume that they are okay. And with a brain injury, that isn't always the case. They may have memory problems, short-term memory problems especially. They may have difficulty with controlling emotions. They may cry easily. They may not cry at all at something you think they should. Sometimes their emotions are stunted. Sometimes they are brought to the forefront. Sometimes they can't control emotions. And anger can be caused by someone just saying the wrong thing, and they can't control that, especially if it's been a frontal lobe, the front part of your brain has been injured. It's fascinating, the different areas of the brain and what can happen and cause different symptoms. So that's sort of what it means when you say that if you know someone with a brain injury, you know one person with a brain injury.
Thanks.
Um,
So what are just a few thoughts on we encounter someone who has a brain injury? How can we be supportive?
I think you can listen. Not everybody wants to tell their story. I know sometimes the people that come to our support group who sustain brain injuries say, I get tired of having to explain myself. I don't like saying to every person I've met, well, I'm this way because I had a brain injury.
Mm.
And so I think, it's like anyone who has a difference. If people are talking more slowly, or if they ask you the same question in just a few seconds, to not judge that, but just to answer the question again if you need to. You can if they say anything about a brain injury, you can ask them about their experiences. So often we're afraid to ask questions of people that we see as different. And it can be an injury, it can be a skin color. If we see people as being different from ourselves, we can be somewhat hesitant to talk to them. And let me tell you, you should talk to them because it's amazing what you can learn. Most of what I know about brain injury has been taught to me by the individuals I've worked with who have sustained a brain injury. They have
Mm.
been gracious enough to share their stories, to talk about their struggles, to talk about their accomplishments. And they've taught me just a wealth of knowledge that I am so grateful for. And I just love working with people with a traumatic brain injury. It changes their lives forever. And it's a little different. I will bring up one thing. It's different from what people call a developmental disability. That's something that you're born with, and so you really haven't known anything else. That's just how you have been since birth.
Like in my case, I lost oxygen in birth.
Yep. And so that you've lived with that your whole life, Jason. You
Yeah,
that's all you've known.
yeah.
Um,
I've had my whole life to adapt to
yeah.
do this. Yeah.
The biggest struggle with someone who's sustained a brain injury is that they can remember who they were, what they could do, and what they can't do now, and how different they are from what they had been. And learning to accept themselves as they are and see the value and who they are today with the traumatic brain injury or with the acquired brain injury is that's an acceptance that's hard won. But when it comes, then people, I think, can start moving forward and really grow. It's not easy. It's not an easy journey.
Doesn't sound like it at all. So as we wrap up, I have two more questions. First, I mean, in the United States and probably in many places around the world right now, things are so polarized politically and and also religiously and in a variety of ways, things are highly polarized in the world. What ideas do you have about caring for each other in such a polarized, challenging landscape?
Well, as you can tell, I love to talk. And I think I'm a believer in that you have to be able to see and try to understand other people's differences from your own ideas. I have friends who have blocked people on Facebook or other social media because their opinions politically or other religiously are different from the ideas that they hold. That I don't think that that's the best way to handle it myself. I think that you need to hear what other people have to say, even if it's not what you believe or if you disagree with it. Otherwise, you close yourself off into this little world where you only look at things one way, and that's not a good way to grow. So I believe that if you can talk to people who have differing opinions from yours, who maybe are a different religion from yours, you can learn about what things they're experiencing, what things they have learned, what they see the world as, and you can grow from that. It doesn't mean you have to be bosom buddies or that you embrace everything that they believe in, but at least you've heard them. And I think we want all of us want to be heard.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think if we listened a little more or a little more willing to listen to others who disagree with us, the world might be a little better place than it is today. I don't know, but I'm gonna keep on trying.
mm,
We'll see if it works.
mm. Thank you. Thank you for trying, and thank you for being inspiring.
Oh,
My last question is, and I ask all my guests this: what does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Cam Broken Leg?
doing my imperfect best. Always being willing to try, even when I'm afraid. And let me tell you, as a social worker, there were many times when I walked into unknown situations all of the
Mm,
time,
mm,
and it used to be that I would be atrociously nervous, and I can't say that I'm not without some nerves even when that happens to me today, but I discovered that if I went in and I listened and tried to understand where those people were coming from, that was my doing my, imperfect, awesome
mm,
perfect best to do the best I could to try and understand and work with someone and learn from them. I don't think I've ever been touched by a human being that I haven't learned something from, or that I
mm,
haven't if I
mm,
haven't experienced something different that I have grown from. I mean, people are fascinating,
mm,
and I mean, if you close yourself off from them just because they're a little different, oh, you lose such value in your life.
mm,
If you embrace it all
mm,
and look at it positively and with wanting to learn, that world's a glorious place out there, even when it's
mm.
in struggles.
Wow. Wow.
I like people.
If you just said if you embrace it all and with the curiosity and wanting to learn the world's a glorious place. Y- really, really powerful and challenging was as we wrap up the podcast and can please stay on the line as I finish, okay?
Certainly. And thank you so much for having me, Jason. I've enjoyed it.
You're welcome, and thanks so much for being here, and thank you all for watching. And people are just so there's so many layers, and there's so much wisdom, and so many conversations to be had. Ken and I have probably known each other for what 20 or 30 years, and
Yeah,
but never in our time of knowing each other until today have we had this conversation, and I found out so many new things about Ken, and learned so many lessons. So I urge you taking this podcast, and thank you for watching. But I urge you to take the lessons you can from Ken, and also be curious about the people around you, even the people you've known for 30 years or your whole life. If you're younger, congratulations. But just be curious about the people you've known for a long time, and ask new questions, and try to have new conversations, and who knows where the conversations will go. Who knows what stories you will hear. Who knows, or you will be inspired. Anyway, I could go on and on. But thanks for tuning in. Tune in for another episode next week, unless you're watching this like 2,000 years from now, in which case you will have to watch reruns because I'll be long gone. So, anyway, until next time, thank you and keep smiling.